everyone again. My name is Chiara Benetolo. I am the Executive Director of the Center for Educational Justice at the PD Green program. I'll tell you more about the center in a minute or in a couple of minutes. But before that, I do want to pass it on to Anaga and Dan to introduce themselves. So Anaga, if you can introduce yourself.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Aniga. I am the co-founder of a program called STEM Unbarred, which is one of the many wonderful programs put on by the PD Green program, which you'll hear more about later. And I'm also a PhD student in computational biology.
Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan Christopher Gardner. I'm a professor in the math department at the University of Maryland, and I work on we have an educational partnership with PD Green regarding the College Bridge math program in the DC jail, and I'm like the Maryland liaison for that program.
Thank you. And a very involved liaison that has contributed to a variety of aspects from curriculum design to recruiting volunteers, which you'll hear all about in a minute. But before we do that, let's take a step back. I want to tell you a bit more about the PD Green program as an organization. We, as some of you may know, we're the largest multi-state provider of individualized educational services and college readiness programs for incarcerated and formerly incarcerated students in the US. And that's actually just half of our mission, that is supporting the goals of students impacted by the criminal legal system. The other half is to educate volunteers and the general public on the systemic, economic, social, legal challenges that people face before, during, and after incarceration. And since our funding in 2008, so over the past 17 years or so, we have served 20,000 students, recruiting and training almost 9,000 volunteers. Well, our footprint is currently focused on the northeastern US, but we are expanding nationally, and we collaborate with partners across the United States. So, to give you a sense of what our main programs are, our bread and butter since 2008 has been tutoring. We utilize volunteer tutors who are undergraduate, graduate students, members of the community, who provide support to students really in a variety of subjects, starting from early literacy and all the way up to students who are working on their master's programs through GED, adult basic education, so on and so forth. And lately, we have expanded the scope of our tutoring support to include things like support for ESL and support for digital literacy. So what we offer are regular tutoring sessions that happen 1 to 4 times a week with really consistent student tutor pairings, and one-on-one or small group, in person or virtual. So this tutoring is looks in different ways everywhere. We also have a college readiness program that we call College Bridge. This is a 12-week program that bridges the gap between high school completion and college. I'm going to go very quickly over the slide because it's actually one of the things that we will be talking about today. So you'll have more opportunities to hear about our College Bridge in a minute. And to bring this all together, in last year, actually, we funded the Puttkamer Center for Educational Justice. Our goal as the center is to serve as the research and strategy division of the PD Green program. We aim to identify and promote best practices in the field of carceral and reentry education, with a focus on really what's our niche as the PD Green program, those individualized support services. And we do that by combining research and practice. So we do evaluation, we do research on the programs that the PD Green as an organization puts forth with the students, but we also look at what's out there, what do we know about what works for marginalized, underserved populations, and how can we operationalize those best practices that are to create evidence-based programs and pilots, which we test, and then when the pilots go well, we'll look at what does it take to scale this pilot, and we put out our findings both to the field of education in prison more generally, and then use them to inform the strategy of the PD Green program. And a really key thing for me in managing and leading the Puttkamer Center for Educational Justice is that we build on the PGP's expertise, and we center the voices of people who are themselves system impacted. I think it's really important for me that they feel and they are not just objects of our research, but really subjects doing the research, doing the curriculum development together with us, the PGP staff. And today we're going to talk to you about a couple of initiatives that we have that focus specifically on STEM education. STEM education is so crucial in prisons, outside prisons. There is a big push nationally, of course, across in the field of education more generally, to get more students engaged in STEM education, because those are also fields that have higher potential for earning, higher potential for careers, rather than just the first job that you find. And I do say this as a person with a PhD in comparative literature. So I am a big lover of the humanities, but I do think that we also need to recognize what the reality is for the job market, for example. And so with all of this in mind, the PGP has been working to expand its programming in math and science and STEM programming more generally. And we'll talk about two examples of programs that we have. The first one, and before that, I know I tend to talk a lot by just at myself. So any questions, thoughts, initial reactions? Again, I think you can use the Q&A in the chat. I will take a look at the app. I see one question. We already responded. So I think we can keep going. First program that we want to talk to you all about is the College Bridge Math course. Why do we need a College Bridge program? We know that only 4% of incarcerated people have a college degree, and formerly incarcerated people are 8 times less likely to complete college than the general population. So there is a big need for higher education in prison. This we all know. As of 2023, Pell Grants have been restored for incarcerated people. Fingers crossed that they stay that way. And this has had as at least a promise to dramatically expand access to higher education for incarcerated learners. But we also need to be mindful of the fact that access alone is not enough. A third of incarcerated students do not have a high school credential, and more than a quarter of even those with a high school credential have very low math skills. And so just the fact that you can theoretically have access to college, have access to funding for college, doesn't mean that you will be able to take advantage of this opportunity. And since Pell reinstatement, we are starting to see a lot of students beginning a program but not graduating. And a big part of the reason for that is that they really are not equipped to succeed in that program. And so with that in mind, in 2020, the PD Green program created a college bridge program that has since been piloted in a few facilities across a number of states, from Washington, D.C., which was our first, the D.C. jail, our first pilot site, all the way to New Jersey, Massachusetts, New York, and Pennsylvania in both state correctional facilities, jails, as well as federal correctional facilities. And I will leave it to Dan to share more about how do we build the College Bridge program. As I mentioned at the beginning, the PD Green program, all of our staff are doing coordination, and the actual instruction and tutoring is done by volunteers, which we recruit in partnership with our wonderful higher education partners, including UND.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, let me also just say if you have any trouble hearing me or if you have any questions, yeah, please just interrupt. But yeah, I hope that I'll tell you a bit about our particular partnership, but I hope it also serves as a case study, for anyone who's looking to build institutional partnerships. So, like I said, my own experience here is from the University of Maryland. Although maybe something I should have said when I introduced myself is that I also have some experience teaching in carceral settings as well, and that certainly informs my pedagogy here too. But if there's one point that I would hope to get across, it's that in my experience in higher education, there's a lot of enthusiasm for people to volunteer, and so partnerships I think can be very productive. So yeah, to give some specifics, since 2022, we've partnered with the College Bridge Math program, and just to give some sense of how that's worked, I've been a faculty contact at the University of Maryland. So the University of Maryland is pretty close to the DC jail, well within commuting distance, and I've advertised the program and solicited volunteers, and yeah, like I said, maybe the main point I'd like to get across is there's always been tremendous interest from undergraduates and graduate students helping out here, and so I think it can be a very synergistic partnership. In our case, Maryland has provided, instructors, tutors. Another thing that I'll be talking about in a few moments is curricular development is a very interesting thing, and I think this has been very good for the College Bridge program. We have a lot of people who are experts in STEM and in STEM education, and so I think we can contribute a lot to the College Bridge program. At the same time, we have this huge pool of affiliates who want to do good. I mean, I think many recognize that this is a really impactful area where we can make the world a better place. And at the same time, it's valuable for them as well. I mean, to give you some idea of the kind of affiliates we have undergraduates, graduate students, faculty, staff, as I said, and those populations have different needs. So, for example, graduate students, it's extremely valuable for them to get teaching experience. Faculty also, it can be very important for them to have experiences that are different than what they might be getting when they're teaching, for example, their courses for the the majors in the university. And to be honest, it's also been helpful for recruitment of students and faculty. So, for example, we were trying to recruit a faculty member last year, and I was telling her about our program, and she thought this was like an amazing thing that was definitely a positive in her assessment of our university. So yeah, so I think what I would like to get across is just that that some of this is of course specific to University of Maryland, but your local university might have a big pool of people who are interested in helping out with a program like this, and I hope you would seek out institutional partnerships like that wherever you are, because one of my dreams is to see more partnerships like this throughout the country. So I saw one thing in the Q&A. Is there a question here? Oh, okay. There was a test to see if the Q&A works. Okay. Are there other questions or anything? Um, okay, well, yeah,
And I
like I,
would love to Dan's point about the amazing relationships and very productive relationships that community-based organizations like the PD Green programs can create with local colleges and universities. If while Dan is talking and you're listening, if you can use the Q&A to write down kind of what organization are you from? Are you from a college? Are you from a community-based organization? What's your role? That way we'll know, and we'll be able to think together with you about how to structure some of those partnerships. So
yeah,
thank you.
absolutely. Yes, I would be very happy to give any more specific details to anyone who specifies more about where they're coming from. Um, Yeah, so let me also say a bit about curricular development, because this is something that I've been involved with as well. One point that I want to make is that in my experience as a math educator, that this is there are certain challenges with this which are quite interesting from a pedagogical point of view. For example, um, in designing a curriculum, one has to keep in mind attendance issues. That's probably the main thing that I would get across. The nature of our program in the DC jail is such that students sometimes miss classes. Sometimes, they have other engagements which supersede, their math class. Um, and one has to be careful about this in math and I think in STEM more broadly. Um, because math, which is what I know best, tends to be cumulative. It builds on itself. So you have to design a curriculum that's realistic about this. So we spent quite a lot of time thinking about this and went for some kind of module type structure that I'm happy to talk about more, where we had some core modules that we think every student really needs to know in order to bridge that gap to college, and then a certain number of optional modules that are certainly great, but if you miss one, it's not going to set you back in learning about the rest. And even the core modules, we did try to design them in such a way that if you miss one, maybe you'll have trouble understanding that core module, but it won't obstruct your understanding of another core module. And there's also issues of assessment. You want to be able to measure the student background so that you can design the right course, and you also want to be able to measure their progress so that you can report back to interested people evidence of success. On the other hand, you also have to make sure that you're not discouraging students. Many students, in the country have a lot of anxiety about mathematics, and you definitely want to take this into account. And as I said, you also have to take into account that students might sometimes miss classes, and so you need some kind of assessment that's not going to be totally thrown off by that. And there's lots of other materials that you have to develop and grade as well. But I think, again, the main point I would make about this is that not only is there a huge pool of people who are interested in this, but this can all be done online. So in our discussions about this, we actually had a national team, which was very exciting. And you can have partners from many institutions. So I would say that this is a challenge of developing the program, but a very exciting one, and one where you can marshal significant resources, around the country to do it well. So that's another aspect that I've been involved with that have been very exciting. And you can see some idea of how we structured this, if you want more specifics. So in the case of math, there's a question of, what do you want to get from math? There's the math that you need for your day-to-day life, like how to budget, how to understand issues of finance, and then there's also math that you need, for your STEM requirements. It's the language of science. Um, so we were trying to develop a course that would do all that in 11 weeks, in such a way that we have time for assessment, and also knowing that students might miss some lectures. And yes, you can just see like how we ended up doing it. You see our core topics are, like I said, these are the things that we felt everyone needs to know in the college bridge. And then we had certain additional topics, and then a certain amount of review and assessment. So yeah, so that's kind of where we were with it. And it's a living thing. So over time, we try things and see what works better and what doesn't, and might tweak it over time. But this was a structure that seemed to work pretty well for this somewhat unique challenge of designing a good program in 12 weeks to a student population that can be somewhat itinerant. So.
Thank you, Dan. And I will say we have now tested this curriculum across several facilities with the needed tweaks that you have everywhere. For example, again, the DC jail, like Dan was saying, has a population where attendance is particularly challenging. We offer it in federal facilities where attendance is less challenging, but we have other issues, and one of the main issues that I have seen with the students personally, just going and meeting with them and talking with the instructors, is a sense of imbalance between needing the support, but also feeling like nobody wants to feel like they're going back to middle school when preparing for college. And so we were very deliberate in the way that we created the worksheets to try and do our best so they look like adult material, and they expose students to the complexity that is, the concept of number is, I have learned by just listening in the curriculum development meetings, is not as intuitive as you may see, as it may seem. There's a long history around, what like just defining the numbers that we use, etc. And so I think that exposing, respecting students' intelligence and experience by incorporating some of those more intellectually challenging aspects, while still reviewing, what is an integer, how do you deal with negative numbers, etc., is something that is key, and it's all the more key in some of the facilities where you have older populations and students who are more who have more of a clearly mapped out journey in front, educational journey in front of them, like typically federal facilities. I want to pause again to ask if there are any other questions.
Yeah, maybe I'll add one thing about not so much about College Bridge, but just again in teaching in places where you have populations who are there for much longer time. Yeah, you can do a lot of things. Like at one time, I volunteered for example, for a calculus course, which was very exciting. But you always have to know, what is the population that you're working with, and what are the goals for the program.
Thank you, absolutely. And speaking of population, I'll leave it on to Anaga to talk about another initiative that we've developed and piloted for a very specific population. There's a population of actually younger students who are incarcerated in DC. DC is doing a lot as far as STEM education. I promise we're doing some STEM in our other regions as well. But yeah, Anaga, take us away.
All right, hi everyone. I'll just quickly reintroduce myself for anyone who joined a little bit later, but my name is Anega. I am currently a PhD student at the University of Oxford, as well as the National Cancer Institute in Washington, D.C. And when I'm not working on my PhD, I've worked with the PD Green program to help set up a program called STEM Unbarred, which, as Kiara mentioned, is a program focused on providing hands-on STEM experiences to young learners, so youth who are currently incarcerated. And so I'm going to spend the next like 10 minutes telling you a little bit about a STEM education program. But before I tell you more about that, I kind of want to contextualize things and maybe pose a question to you, which is, think back to your, elementary, middle school, high school, even college experiences. Um, and I would love to hear in the Q&A, what has been your most memorable science experience?
And while people take a moment to hopefully respond to Anaga's question, I want to qualify youth a little bit to say that the youth that we serve in the STEM Bar program are technically they could be as young as 12, but most of them are between 17 and 18 years old, and they do face a lot of the same challenges that our adult students who are participating in the college bridge program face. A lot of them are, despite being almost 18 or 18, they are they're not at the grade level where their peers outside are. So there is again that feeling of being quote unquote late in your education, and that sense of needing support in some areas, but not wanting to be, rightly so, not wanting to be treated as the 12-year-old who may be studying those same subjects in a different institution. Okay.
Thanks for that, Kiara. I don't see any answers on my end, so I will, I guess, as we maybe wait for some answers to come in, we'll kind of share my own personal answer, which is that, I, chose to do a PhD in biology, and I actually can look back to an experience I had in middle school, which I can say very definitively was the moment that I knew I wanted to become a scientist, and that was doing a calorimetry experiment in my chemistry class, and where we got to figure out how many calories were in a Cheeto by lighting it on fire. And I just thought that was so cool, that we were able to like actually figure out what the number on the packaging meant and like how we got that. So next slide. And I think looking back on that now, what really stood out for me with that experience was that it was a very hands-on experience. I wasn't learning about calorimetry by like reading about it in a book or by listening to a instructor tell me about calorimetry. I got to really understand it by getting my hands dirty and experiencing what calorimetry was in the real world. And I see we do have an answer in the chat. Heather is talking a little bit about doing dissections. That's another really common answer we hear. It was really kind of learning about structure by being able to physically like participate in an activity yourself. And so I started my experience with the PD Green program as a volunteer tutor in the DC region. And so I, as a person with a STEM background, used to help students a lot with their science and math courses. And these are students who were incarcerated at the juvenile carceral facility in Washington, DC. And so in my role, I would talk to students a lot about, what their science classes were like, how they were feeling about their science homework. And over again, I would hear from students that they really disliked their science courses. They found them boring. They didn't understand why they had to be there. And so we started asking questions about, why they felt that way, started sitting in on student science classes. And eventually we actually kind of formalized some of the anecdotal evidence we were getting into a formal survey of students. And what we learned from talking to students was that the vast majority of our incarcerated students actually preferred to learn in the same way that I did and that Heather did, which is in a hands-on manner. But then when we compared that to the type of education that students were getting in their science courses, we found that the vast majority of our students did not ever have the opportunity to do something hands-on with science. And this was true both, while they were in a highly secure carceral facility, but for many of our students also in their science experiences before they became incarcerated. So next slide. And so we really believed that these hands-on experiences were really crucial to getting students engaged and getting students to better understand their science curriculum. And I'm sorry, our program used to be called Science Unlocked. It's now called STEM and BARD, but we developed the STEM and BARD program to address these specific challenges and really bring hands-on STEM activities to incarcerated youth. And so the way that our program works is we actually have a 3-part educational setup. So we start with a somewhat traditional classroom lecture. And this classroom lecture, the purpose of it is really to help ground students in the background scientific knowledge that they need to then complete the second part, the fun part, the hands-on science activity. And then finally, we really want to measure the efficacy of our program, make sure that students are gaining an understanding of the scientific concepts that we are teaching them. And so we do give students a knowledge assessment both before and after our demo-based interventions, really to make sure that our program is working the way that we want it to. Now, our students participate in a very generalized scientific curriculum. So over the course of an academic year, students can expect to learn kind of all of the different scientific disciplines. So students, learn about biology, they learn about chemistry, they learn about physics, they learn about engineering, all over the course of one academic year. We also find that unlike maybe a more traditional academic classroom where you see the same students throughout the entirety of the year, we actually have the average time that we interact with one student ranges from between about a month to about 3 months as the average amount of time a student is at the facility. And so to take this into account, we actually run a really wide array of demonstrations that span a variety of scientific disciplines. And each of our demonstrations is standalone. So unlike what Dan was mentioning earlier, where a lot of the math curriculum builds upon each other. In our case, we have a number of standalone demonstrations that span a wide array of disciplines. And so, as some examples of some of the things we've done with our students over the years, next slide. We have demos that span neuroscience. So we come in and teach students about brain-computer interfaces through some really cool neuroscience devices that we have. We give students the opportunity to look at cells under the microscope, which for many students is the first time they see things like their own cheek cells really up close and personal. To learn about chemistry, we launch bottle rockets. For biology, we do DNA extractions, and we look at, the central dogma, DNA to RNA to protein. One of our most popular demos with students is a physics and engineering demo we do, where students have the opportunity to use the principles of electromagnetism to build their own speaker. This is really popular because we have a lot of aspiring musicians among our students. And so students really love being able to build a speaker that they can then listen to their own music with. One of our, we say least popular, but just maybe let's say most exciting or most new to our students is a demo we do on ecology, where we actually bring in insects and students have the opportunity to engage with insects, understand their role in the ecosystem, et cetera. And that's just a small sampling of the different activities that we do as part of our curriculum. Next slide. And so one of the things that's really important to us is being able to connect our demonstrations to students' lived experiences. Hannah, the co-founder of Science Unlocked, who's also joined us, and I are both scientists ourselves. And so, of course, it would be really, really exciting for us if every single one of our students, chose to pursue a career in STEM. But even if that's not the case, really the goal of our program is to show students that science is applicable no matter what career they choose and no matter, where their educational journey takes them. And so we really try to build our demos around students' interests and around students' lived experiences. And so as an example, one of the demonstrations that we do is focused on DNA extraction. So we actually help students, extract DNA from strawberries. This is always really fun because DNA kind of looks like snot when it comes out of strawberries, and students really enjoy kind of being able to hold it up, like hold DNA in their hand and say, oh, this is what it looks like. The second day of this demonstration is actually a demonstration where we do gel electrophoresis. And we actually teach gel electrophoresis in the context of forensic science. So we actually set up a little mock case for students. When we first started doing this demo, there was kind of someone came in and like raided the snack closet, and students were trying to figure out who it was. And so we actually made a little case file where students could use gel electrophoresis to figure out, which of the science team ate all the snacks. And this was really, really popular among students because it just connected to what was going on in their lives at the time. Next slide. I'll turn it over to Hannah.
And Anna, if you want to introduce yourself before speaking more about the program, and also you need to unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm so sorry for being late. My name is Hannah. As Anna said, I am the co-founder of Science Unlocked, and I'm sure, already talked about all the wonderful things. So I'll just, kind of cap it with just showing the amazing growth that the program has had for the past 3 years that we've been running it. And you can see on the left-hand side that that is depicting the growth of the number of demonstrations we do with the students. So, when it was kind of like a passion project that just started. We started with just one pilot experiment, and that was the strawberry DNA that Anna mentioned. And then as we've gone now to, our current, which is the spring of 2025, we have up to like 16 demos that we do with the students. So we do about we go in four sessions per month now versus the 2 that we used to do. So that's a 50% increase. That has just been amazing. And also, not only did the number of demos increase, the number of volunteers increase as well. And actually, that's why we ended up increasing the amount of demos, because we wanted to make sure that our volunteers got enough face time and enough experience with the students, so that they can all have this amazing and pretty valuable experience that we feel that they can connect with the students. So for the program effectiveness that we have realized since starting is that we've actually been able to engage over 300 incarcerated students, which is crazy to think about. And we've been able to do this in science, connecting them with also over like 30 STEM professionals, because our volunteers, they are STEM professionals. So they've just been able to have that like FaceTime with STEM professionals across all boards of different fields that you can imagine that can exist in STEM. And also, we've seen a pretty great increase in scientific knowledge. We have some data that shows that the students actually do really well when they take their knowledge assessments. So, and this grows when they take the demo. After, when they take the demos and then they do the assessments, we have a pretty, bigger difference in how much they retained and how much more knowledge that they have as a result of the demos. And lastly, also, but certainly not the least, we've also increased student awareness of the way science applies to their everyday lives. They make really great and effortless and unique comparisons to their daily lives, which is so amazing. I think one of the most fun demos that they probably enjoyed really well was the immunology demo. And we asked the kids to explain what, after the demo, how do they see immunity? And then they mentioned that immunity is like legal protection, just like, their case, just like how it applies so much to what they go through. So I think they just make really effortless connections that is really profound. So. Oh, and yeah, so what we did was we also, wanted to see if our program is also increasing the student engagement and not just the assessment, because that is a big part of of STEM on Bar's goal. And you can see that when just through the like art scale, you can see that the students are actually they're significantly more excited for science and the demo that they did this week. When you know, when comparing before and after they did the demo. So that's really great because it shows that our demos are actually increasing their excitement for, you know, for science and doing science. And also there is a pretty decent increase as well in saying that in the children saying that they are actually interested in science. So this is pretty, you know, this is really great because we're not only just improving their scores, but also increasing their engagement and interest in science. And then with the knowledge scores, so here is just the before and after scores that the students have with the different demos. So we've only just shown 3 here, just as you know, just as examples. And you can see that the pre-survey, the knowledge assessment before they take the demo is significantly less than the scores that they get after they take the demo, which shows that demos are actually improving the way that the students learn and the way that they retain and actually think through the questions.
Thank you, Anna. Could I ask you to walk us through this graph for people who maybe are not as experienced in reading those types of graphs?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. So so on the x-axis, those are the different demos. So we do so many demos, but these are just 3 examples. So the magnetic speaker, the heart rate monitor, and the strawberry DNA. And then the 2 different green colors correspond to the scores that they got. So we give them the test before they do the demo, and then we also give them that same test after they do the demo. So the light green is the test that they got, the scores that they got before they did the demo, and then the dark green is the scores that they got after. So you can see that like using the asterisks show significance, and you can see that for each of the 3 demos, you can see that the scores significantly increase between when they take the test before they do the demos and that they do the test after they do the demos. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. That was really helpful.
And then so then we also wanted to see if the demos increase student understanding of the you know, of the content. And then so we did another Likert scale, and you can see that this they show that they can apply science to things that they're interested in. So you know, it's important to be excited about science, but also to realize that science is actually very applicable and ubiquitous to our lives. And I think that makes it a more effortless want and need to want to pursue science. So I think this is a very important, you know, significance that we see with the students, showing that science is not just some entity that is outside of them and just something that is applicable and relative to their daily lives.
Thank you. I think we've heard a lot about 2 really great programs, and I say that not just because I am a small part behind both programs, but really Dana, Anaga, and Anna are the protagonists in running them and designing them. So I'm really grateful that you all were able to join us today and share some of the thinking that goes behind designing curricula for students who are behind bars and are struggling with STEM, like many students were not behind bars, and facing some unique challenges in addressing these in approaching those subjects. So I want to open it up to questions from our audience. As a reminder, please use the Q&A function in the bar as opposed to the chat. The chat has been disabled. That's my understanding by the organizers. So you have to use the Q&A function if you want to ask questions. but I'll say we welcome questions as well as anyone sharing their experience organizing or participating in STEM-focused programs behind bars or in reentry settings. So. And while people are thinking about their questions, I have a question for I think all of our panelists. All of you have experience teaching and working both outside prisons and inside correctional spaces. And then I know you started talking about some of this, but I'm curious what differences, what unique challenges, and maybe if you see any unique opportunities to engage to students who are incarcerated, and as we said, also tend to be older than the students who would be learning the same things outside.
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to speak, but I don't know if anybody else would like to go first. Anything's really with me.
First then.
Okay, sure. Um, well, actually, I'm not sure to what extent it addresses your question, but the first thing that comes to mind is, as an educational experience itself, my experiences teaching in prisons were some of the most gratifying of my career, because the students, so if you teach in a university setting, you have a collection of students, particularly in math. Some of the students are taking the course because it fulfills some kind of requirement. Many don't necessarily want to be there for one reason or another. When you're teaching in a carceral setting, the students who take the class really want to be there, and they have a lot of them have a very clear sense of what they want to get out of the class. As you're saying, sometimes it's an older population of students. So one thing you find if you teach an undergraduate class at sort of the University of Maryland or something, is that many students are 18, 19 years old. They don't even know what exactly they're hoping to get out of the class, except that it's some stepping stone towards some degree requirement or something like that. And I was really amazed in my experience at how many students have specific desire, a real reason why they're taking the class, and are grateful and excited to be there. So I always found that a big opportunity to know what it is the students want to get out of the class, and then to develop as an educator to figure out how you can provide that was a very exciting thing for me.
Thank you. And I think that is a very common experience in teaching behind bars. I do also think it's important that we don't idealize the students who are incarcerated. They also have other stuff going on in their lives, and as a consequence, they're not always hyper focused on the classes. But I do agree that there is a greater sense of purpose in being in an educational space when you are when inside carceral spaces versus, and then less of it's not a requirement, right? So already that makes it for a different environment. Anaga and Anna.
Yeah, I guess I definitely agree with like everything that was just said. I will say one of the differences for us with STEM and BARD working with the youth population is that with incarcerated youth, actually every single one of our students does have to attend school. So one of the challenges that we see is that, unlike maybe in a more traditional academic setting where like you don't necessarily, you kind of walk in and students are there like ready to learn. One of the challenges we have is that our students are educated like on their unit floor. So there's not a separate kind of classroom that students kind of go to like expect to be in an area to learn. So one of our biggest challenges actually is just getting students' attention at the very beginning. And so often, one of the most recent demos we did, for example, we did like an egg drop. And we walk in and like students are like talking, doing their own thing, like, And one of the first things we did just to get their attention is one of our volunteers stood on top of a table and dropped an egg on the ground. And that really like captured everyone's attention. But then in terms of, opportunities, I think it is really just so rewarding. Like so many of our students like wear their emotions on their sleeve. And so, in that same demo, like students were kind of building a contraption to keep an egg from breaking. And like when students finally got theirs to work, there was just like so much cheering and excitement and just like really high energy in the room that you don't always see in every academic setting. So it was just very rewarding to see students go from like not paying attention to us to just being so excited that their activity worked.
Yeah, and I'll echo that. I mean, I think for us, our first introduction to these students is, them being excited about, we're doing something correct and actually being able to, save an egg from dropping and splattering everywhere. So I think our first introduction is, maybe a bit different from what traditional classes might, might experience, but because typically they're just usually pretty happy when they do a good job and when they actually answer a relatable question. So
Absolutely. Thank you. And I see we have a question from the audience that is there a cost for the students? No, there is no cost for the student. The PD Green program is funded primarily through foundation grants and individual donors. So specifically so that our programs can be free for all of our students. And that is the case for STEM and BARD as well as the College Bridge program. The College Bridge program also does not use Pell Grants. And so that is another important advantage. Pell Grants have a lifetime cap, and there's also only a limited number of Pell Grants that you can use for remedial courses. So what often happens in higher education in prison programs is that students will end up using up a significant portion of their Pell Grants in order to like on remedial courses that they need before they are able to access credit bearing math courses that will count towards their degree. And so then when you're ready to enter those courses, you have much fewer Pell dollars left than your peers who started, who started with the math 101 as opposed to having to start from the math 010 015 that does not count towards your degree. So we are not using Pell Grants for the College Bridge program. Okay. Any other questions or thoughts?
I mean, something else I wanted to say in a slightly different direction. Another very exciting thing about teaching in carceral settings, in my experience, is that you have more flexibility. From an educator point of view, you have more flexibility in designing your curriculum. And I would imagine it's the same in STEM on BARD. I mean, if I'm assigned to teach a large university class, especially if it's a more introductory class, the syllabus is quite prescribed by the university, and there's not much room to design what I think is my kind of dream class. But something that's great in my experience is you can really try to think like, what is the perfect version of the class that you're teaching? And there's a lot of flexibility in making your vision come true. So I think that's a very exciting thing as an educator. That's just something I wanted to add.
Yeah, I was gonna say to echo that, a lot of our like best STEM activities either came from like students telling us like, oh, well, like, what does this mean? Or like, I want to look at this, or like, we had a microscopy demo because students like told us like, oh, we're learning about cells, but like, how do I even know that's real? And so we were able to like bring in microscopes and like show them. Some of our best demos also come from like volunteers. So like the insect demo that we did with students, like I assure you, I don't like touching insects. I would never want to do that myself. But we had a volunteer who was an entomologist, who wanted to bring in and like share his joy of insects with our students. And so I think something that's really unique, and I think is one of the strengths of our program, is really being able to build both on like student and volunteer interest to develop like a program that evolves over time. And I think based on what I saw about the curriculum slide of College Bridge Math, I think in the same way that the curriculum seems to be built also based on what students want to learn and what students' interests are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is having taught similar programs myself in the humanities inside carceral facilities, you learn a lot from the students and their interests, and you have a lot of freedom to customize your programs based on those. So if there are no more questions, I will wrap this up, but I have a couple of final slides to share with you all. So if you want to know more about the PD Green program in general, as well as STEM and BARD or our College Bridge program, please visit our website. You have a QR code here. You can subscribe to our newsletter, other QR code, and the last QR code is to learn more about some of our specific programs across our regions. So please be in touch. You can also stay connected on our social media. And finally, you can reach us by email. I have our email addresses here. Please don't hesitate. We're always happy to engage. If anybody is interested in the slides for this presentation, please write to me. I'm happy to share those as well. And thanks again for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful evening, afternoon, end of the morning, depending on where you are, your base, and if you are in person at the conference, enjoy the rest of the conference. So thank you, and thanks for our panelists for joining us today.